The only garbage I know is Steven Crowder and Donald Trump. So they're garbage. I don't think all of Donald Trump's supporters are garbage. I think that many of them are good people that have been misinformed by Donald Trump and Steven Crowder's lies.
Tim Miller of The Bulwark was a guest on Piers Morgan's show, Piers Morgan Uncensored, to go up against MAGA right-winger Steven Crowder and Piers Morgan himself. We're going to take a look at clips of Tim Miller and Steven Crowder on Piers Morgan's show. I will share my thoughts from time to time as well. This is a really good one. Let's check this out together.
Thank you. Look, it's not about garbage. Desperate clingers, guns to their guns and Bible, deplorables, Nazis, garbage. The key difference here that we see, and I've gone through this quite a bit because the New York Times has a whole running article, at least between 2015 and 2021, as to all of Donald Trump's insults on Twitter before he was banned. You won't find Donald Trump insulting the American voter like you do with the left. They did refer, we can argue the phantom apostrophe, like you said. I appreciate you recognizing its absurdity. Donald Trump goes after those who are in power, the elites. He refers to the DNC. He refers to the establishment. You may not like him referring to the swamp. You may not like him referring to people inside the Beltway, but he's never gone after the American voters. He actually does respect them, and he's trying to win them over. That's what we're actually talking about. And it's the Achilles heel of the Democrat Party today. They're very elitist. That's the problem with garbage.
Was it still damaging for Donald Trump to have this guy, Tony Hinchcliffe, at Madison Square Garden? I was there, and aside from anything else, the joke fell completely flat in the room, so it didn't work even on a comedic value with him. Although I thought Jon Stewart made a good point that this guy's a roaster. It's what he does. He roasts everybody and everything. But putting that aside, I saw Megyn Kelly and Bill O'Reilly both saying, look, if you're going to get to the last week of a race, you don't want to have people at your rallies insulting the whole of Puerto Rico, given how many Puerto Ricans, for example, are in the state of Pennsylvania, a crucial state. Do you agree with that?
I don't care. And I mean, I know we're discussing perception. Look, I think there's a huge difference, for example, between a roast comedian or an insult comedian making a joke. I think there's a big difference between that and the sitting president of the United States between biting baby stints, referring to the American voters as garbage. You may not like one, but I don't think that we should be applying the same standard. Donald Trump has never called anyone garbage. Barack Obama referred to half of America as bitter clingers. Hillary Clinton, at least half of Trump voters as deplorables. And you know what? I've heard people refer to that joke as horrifying. I hate it when people feign offense when they're not really offended. Maybe some people are offended. I think a lot of people aren't that offended by the joke, at least not as much as they let on to be. But I've heard a lot of people refer to it as horrifying, that rally. I don't think a joke from an insult comic is horrifying. You know what I do think is horrifying? I don't know if you know this. Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, killed 6 million Jews. I know it's lost on a lot of people. I think that's horrifying. And I think to belittle the horrifying acts of the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Workers' Party, by referring to Donald Trump as a Nazi, which is largely the reason he was the subject of an assassination plot at least 2 times that we know of, I think that's horrifying. But that's just my opinion, and I'll disagree with people.
So Steven Crowder says that Donald Trump never goes after the American voter. So Donald Trump did a Fox News interview in which he said, I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're the big, and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard. Or if really necessary, by the military, because they can't let that happen. Now, Donald Trump doesn't explicitly define who these bad people are and the radical left people, radical left lunatics and all of that. But presumably some of that is voters and not just people who are part of the deep state and part of the Democrat Party, as Steven Crowder says here. He does the cutesy thing of not calling it the Democratic Party. So, who is Donald Trump talking about here? Presumably some of that is regular people who vote.
Well, I actually agree with you, but someone who doesn't is the host of The Bulwark, Tim Miller, who has this to say in response. Tim, welcome to Uncensored.
I was just laughing listening to all that, Piers. Donald Trump's never called anybody garbage. Donald Trump called Kamala Harris's advisors garbage just like the other week. Donald Trump said America is a trash can and the world is sending their garbage, which is migrants here. Donald Trump's called me and other people that oppose him in the media the enemy of the people. He's called people human scum. He said that Haitian migrants were eating cats and dogs. Do we need to keep doing this? Like this, like we're going to pretend to be offended on behalf of Donald Trump? I mean, and Steven Crowder, by the way, his whole career, this is why he's on Rumble, not on YouTube, because he got kicked off YouTube because all he does is insult gay people, insult trans people. The only garbage I know is Steven Crowder and Donald Trump. So they're garbage. I don't think all of Donald Trump's supporters are garbage. I think that many of them are good people that have been misinformed by Donald Trump and Steven Crowder's lies.
Stephen, your response.
Yeah, well, look, one thing, I don't like the way that these panels sometimes some people descend into nothing but ad hominem and interrupt each other. So I promise you, I'm going to respect your time, and you will not hear me speak a single time today, not one interruption, until you hear this bell. I just ask that you give me the floor. So not going to address the ad hominem, but I've never been...
How dorky is that from Steven Crowder? I mean, okay. But Tim Miller, I mean, I don't know that you can say it a lot better than what he said there. And, this is something that doesn't get brought up very much by the media. The Haitian migrants that they went after are here legally. Now, Steven Crowder is going to talk about, he's going to go on an anti-immigrant tirade about how America is for Americans. Well, it's one thing to be against illegal people coming here illegally. It's another thing to have people who come here legally and are allowed to be here by law, but these far right-wing MAGA people like Steven Crowder are against that too. They don't want legal immigrants, apparently.
Been banned from YouTube. As a matter of fact, this will be up on YouTube. The election live stream of the century will be on YouTube as well. Every single example that was just given was not addressed to the American people at large, and not even the Democrat voting base at large. America is for Americans. Are black people not Americans? Are Hispanic Americans not Americans? The qualifier that I have always made, and Donald Trump has always made, and the reason that so many Americans support him is because there aren't those qualifiers of race that we see in identity politics. Every single example, I could go through all of them. The people around Kamala Harris, the people surrounding her, are scum and garbage. That's not going to be misinterpreted as Kamala's supporters are garbage. The voters of Donald Trump are deplorable. These people are scum. Kamala Harris is dumb, whatever he said. That's very different from the hatred, the reviling of the American voter. Your floor.
And Steven Crowder, again, what I wish Piers Morgan would bring up these quotes from Trump about the enemy within and the radical left and all of that. Again, Trump doesn't say explicitly who those people are. He doesn't say, oh, Kamala Harris is the radical left and the enemy within, or Joe Biden is the radical left and the enemy within. He's just talking about people that oppose him.
Yeah, you know what? Tim Miller, what I would say is...
And Steven Crowder actually here is not interrupting Tim Miller, but then, of course, Piers Morgan immediately interrupts Tim Miller. This is one of Piers Morgan's little tricks that he does. He always interrupts the whoever isn't the MAGA person. I don't want to say the progressive with Tim Miller because he was a former Republican strategist.
People on the left, they're very, very quick to be very offended by Trump's rhetoric. This has been going on for 8 years now, that this guy talks in a disparaging way about people. It's unacceptable. It's awful, blah, 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 blah. But you think nothing as a group of constantly flashing the Nazi word around, fascist, Nazi, and now garbage. Why is it one rule for Trump? Why do you want him to clean up the way he talks, but a completely different set of rules for your own side? Why are you allowed to just go around calling people mass murderers?
I'm not. Like I said, the only people I called garbage were Donald Trump and Steven Crowder because they've acted like garbage by disparaging people their entire careers. Like that was the whole premise of both of these two guys' careers. Donald Trump's just been a little bit more successful at it.
Yeah, Tim Miller and Piers Morgan isn't going to give him any kudos for this, but Tim Miller said that he thinks a lot of the Trump voters are fine, okay people, just normal people that have been misled by Donald Trump and the MAGA movement.
So Joe Biden's statement, I think, was like totally nonsensical marble mouth. And I was maybe one of the most vocal people saying Joe Biden shouldn't run for president again. Joe Biden isn't running for president. Kamala Harris is running for president. And she gave a speech on the Ellipse where she talked about how MAGA voters would have and MAGA politicians would have a seat at the table in her administration. So you guys are trying to make something out of nothing, and you're trying to do this fake outrage where it's like in soccer, Piers, where you guys are flopping. You're flopping on the ground, hoping the refs call a foul on Joe Biden, when Donald Trump's whole career has been insults and lies and disparaging people, and also his actual actions have been hurtful. The sexual assault that he committed on women, the fact that he banned people from coming to this country based on their religion, the separating of family. We could just go on and on about Donald Trump's behavior, the cops that got injured at the Capitol because of the riot that he started. So Donald Trump, it's not just his words, it's his actions that have been harmful. And you guys can get mad about what the soon-to-be former president, Joe Biden, incomprehensibly said, but he's not running against Joe Biden. And it seems like a desperate ploy to put on a fancy costume and dress up like an Oompa Loompa.
All right, Stephen, last time I checked, Joe Biden remains the current president of the United States. He is the leader of the free world. And for him to pop up as Kamala Harris is delivering her supposed great final mission statement to the electorate on a Skype call, calling half of America garbage, struck me as just, never mind anything else, incredibly bad timing, to the point where you think, was that deliberate? Is he trying to sabotage her?
Thank you. But again, I'm really going to avoid ad hominem, which is really tough because it seems to be coming from the other side of this panel here.
I will note for the record that you have not gone ad hominem. And Tim, to be fair, all you've done is abuse Steve. All you've done is abuse Steve on a personal level. I actually would like to rise above that.
His whole career is all he's done is attack gay and trans people. Now he's he's getting offended, being called out for it. Just Google his history of his comments about gays, trans people, women. He is Mr. Ad hominem. So don't try to be oh, I'm Mr. Nice Guy now. Come on, give me a break. Let's be honest.
Stephen?
Okay, thank you for giving me the floor. As far as it being ill-advised, I would say so with Joe Biden. The problem is that Kamala Harris was given so many opportunities to distance herself from Joe Biden. The Biden-Harris administration, she chose not to. She said there's not a thing that she would do differently, and she was one of his most important advisors in all of the decisions that had an impact. Vice presidents aren't always given such an easily identifiable pet project. She was. And I know the talking point is she wasn't the border czar, even though Biden said that. The point is she was in charge of, she was being tasked with discovering the root cause of the immigration issue. Well, we had 3 million under Donald Trump's tenure, and now we have at least 15 to 20 million on the low end. That is a huge impact that affects Americans. If we want to talk about Donald Trump's
15 to 20 million on the low end, I don't think there are any reputable numbers saying there's 15 to 20 million people here illegally.
Actions hurting Americans. Look, I guess we're back to 2016. The issue is no Americans have lived actions that have harmed them more than the latest administration. They've lived it. They lived Donald Trump for 4 years. They've lived Biden-Harris for 4 years.
So, okay. So no American has lived any actions that have harmed them more than the last 4 years. So where was Steven Crowder when Donald Trump wouldn't wear a mask during the pandemic and wouldn't tell people to wear a mask? How many lives maybe could have been saved if Donald Trump would have been more proactive with the pandemic and said, hey, I'm Donald Trump and I'm a manly man and I wear a mask. So if you're a manly man or a tough woman, you should wear a mask too. He never did that. And how many people died as a result? So I don't know how anyone can say there's been more harm done to people during these last 4 years than the 4 years of Donald Trump, when people literally died in large numbers because of a pandemic and that Donald Trump and his administration mismanaged. So Steven Crowder it's revisionist history here on this one.
Years. It doesn't work. It falls on deaf ears. It's like Paul Revere always saying, the exact same economy is coming. The exact same economy is coming. If you want to talk about actions that have hurt, I would argue that the actions on the border, the actions on American energy, the policies, which I would like to discuss, have hurt Americans. It's why they're rejecting Kamala Harris. It's why they trust Donald Trump more on issues like the economy and immigration. And by the way, I'm one of them, but the point remains, not one example has been presented. And by the way, I'm not offended by any of this. You haven't heard me feign outrage. I've just tried to describe the situation, why Americans don't like it. Not one example at all of Donald Trump referring to the American people at large as garbage or insulting them as the Democrat Party does every single election cycle. Your floor.
The other thing I would say to you, Tim, is
So I love how Piers Morgan is always going to take the right-wing side. So he doesn't give this little speech with Steven Crowder about how Steven Crowder is wrong. He just defends him and Donald Trump and MAGA. But before he lets Tim Miller speak, he's got to give him a little lecture. And another thing, Piers Morgan is obsessed with, for whatever reason, he's really hung up on the fact that Joe Biden did a Zoom call. I don't know why. He said this in other instances on his show about the comments that Joe Biden made. I don't know why it matters that it was on a Zoom call. And also, he is very offended by people calling Donald Trump Hitler or a Nazi or a fascist or a dictator or whatever. That really gets under Piers Morgan's skin, even though Piers Morgan claims to not be a supporter of Trump. He's just known him for a long time. But he went to his rally and he defends him all the time on his show. But he's not really a supporter of Donald Trump. Piers Morgan isn't.
I find as an ongoing bizarre set of circumstances is that I keep hearing again from the left that Trump is the most racist candidate there's ever been, etc. He's a fascist and so on. How do you explain, if that is the case, how do you explain that his support amongst Black and Latino Americans is rising to record levels for him in the last 8 years? Why is that happening? Why are they gravitating to somebody who is supposedly this terrible racist?
I mean, we haven't voted yet, Pierce, so let's see how that turns out next week. It looks like we're going to have record turnout in Detroit, they just said. We'll see if there's a surprising turnout for Donald Trump there. I kind of doubt it. But this whole thing that's like, you guys want to play in this fantasy pretend world where it's like Donald Trump doesn't insult people. What? Like, everyone watching knows that's not true. Why is the left calling Donald Trump a fascist? The left isn't calling Donald Trump a fascist. John Kelly, who Donald Trump made the head of his Department of Homeland Security, who oversaw the Muslim ban 1.0, and then Donald Trump promoted him to chief of staff. And then he was his longest serving chief of staff. He wasn't a never Trumper like me. He wasn't a moderate Republican rhino. He's a down the line conservative American hero that Donald Trump hired twice, who says he is concerned that Donald Trump has fascist tendencies. And there were times during the first administration where Donald Trump wanted to do things against the law, and it required him and Mattis and Milley and others to prevent him from doing it. And he's worried that those guardrails won't be around the next term. So it's not the left, it's not MSNBC, it's not wild-eyed liberals. It's John Kelly, a conservative American hero that Donald Trump hired twice, that is saying that about him. And you guys need to reckon with that rather than just pointing fingers.
All right. I mean, Stephen, that's a fair point. There have been a number of people of John Kelly's ilk who have come forward and said they think Trump is dangerous, who did work with him at the White House. What's your response to that?
Thank you. Well, this is the same John Kelly, by the way, in The Atlantic, the same journalist who spouted the losers and suckers lie, right? This is a disgruntled former employee. Now, maybe it's true, only that same article included Donald Trump saying that we don't need to spend that much for an effing Mexican. By the way, the soldier's family immediately came out and refuted it. So if we're going to talk about people who don't like him, he said, she said, we can do that, or we can discuss the results for the American people and what affects them at large. We can reckon with that. There you go. That's the reckoning. I don't really care what John Kelly says, but here's the fundamental dynamic. And this is why the left, and this is certainly why legacy media, I'm not saying the media, but legacy media, ABC, NBC, CBS, and big tech, they're demanding that Americans trust their institutions, and they're blaming Americans for not trusting their institutions. This article in The Atlantic, John Kelly, is exactly why Americans don't trust those institutions. I trust the family of the soldier, not John Kelly. I trust the American people who want us to have voter ID, not people who say the most secure and fair elections of all time. When we look at the Hunter Biden laptop story, which I know will be dismissed and people say that it was allowed to after a day, that's the perfect...
I like Tim Miller laughing about that. Stephen Crowder is bringing up Hunter Biden laptop. It's one of their go-tos.
Encapsulation of the institutions that we're demanded to trust who have failed us, whether it's intelligence officials, whether it's Facebook and the CEO of which apologizing afterwards, Jack Dorsey, YouTube's, the fundamental Democratic Party, and we're told, wait, trust your institutions. Well, I don't trust the institutions that repeat lies that have been debunked, including some specifically from John Kelly. I don't trust those publications. I trust the voice of the family of that soldier. And by the way, the families of all the soldiers who overwhelmingly support Donald Trump and the Republican platform, in contrast to Kamala Harris. Your floor.
Tim Miller, I want to talk to you directly about the fact you went down to confront the MAGA mastermind, Steve Bannon, when he...
So here, Piers Morgan moves on to something else. So I wanted to just stick with this debate between Tim Miller and Stephen Crowder with the main topic of this segment, which was, rhetoric on both sides. One thing I want to go back to, Piers Morgan talks about Trump gaining ground with black voters. And Tim Miller has a good point here. He's like, oh, let's wait and see what happens with actually voting versus looking at the polls. But the polls are showing 77% of black voters voting for Kamala Harris. So, I don't know what the numbers were previously, but if Trump gained a couple of percentage of black voters, does that really mean it's, he's really gained ground with black voters? I mean, I guess technically if he goes up a little bit, but it's like still more than 75% to about 25%, 77% to 23% or whatever. So that doesn't seem to, this is something that the media has really touted. Oh, black voters are, more interested in Trump now, but it doesn't really seem to be the case. But let me know what you think about this. Who do you think came out ahead in this particular debate? Tim Miller versus Steven Crowder. And I would argue Tim Miller against not just Steven Crowder, but Piers Morgan himself, which is what always happens in these debates. They always gang up on the progressive or the person who is against Donald Trump. But let me know in the comments who you think won here. Make or comment about anything that you'd like to. It doesn't have to be about Steven Crowder, Donald Trump, Piers Morgan, or Tim Miller. You can comment up about anything that you like. I love to read your comments. Make sure to give me a like and subscribe to help the channel grow. I'm closing in on 40,000 subscribers. I'd like to get up to 50,000, 100,000 and beyond to bring out more content like this. So I hope you like what I'm doing. If you do, please subscribe. This is Chris on Culture, and I will see you in the next video.